"That dog is not saluting you, General. He is trying to make you remember." The words had not yet been spoken when the white K-9 stopped in the middle of the ceremonial field at Camp Lejeune and fixed his pale amber eyes on Major General Elijah Brooks. It was 9:17 on a cool October morning, the kind of North Carolina morning when salt drifted inland from the coast and settled lightly over pressed uniforms, polished shoes, and rows of folding chairs arranged with military precision. Flags moved in the breeze above the reviewing stand. A brass band waited beneath the shadow of an oak tree. More than 200 Marines stood facing the platform, their posture steady, their faces composed, while families and officers gathered to witness the final promotion ceremony of Elijah's 32-year career. Everything was in its place. Everything except the dog. Ghost had been walking beside Gunnery Sergeant Mason Reed near the rear of the formation when he suddenly stopped. His white coat caught the morning light, almost silver along his shoulders, making him look less like an animal and more like something shaped from frost. Mason gave the leash a gentle pull. "Come on, Ghost." The K-9 did not move. His ears pointed toward the reviewing stand. His mouth closed. His breathing slowed. He was staring directly at Elijah. At first, only Mason noticed. Then Captain Rachel Hayes turned from the veterinary detail and followed the dog's gaze. A few Marines shifted their eyes without moving their heads. Elijah continued listening as the base commander read from the citation in front of him, but he felt the attention before he understood its source. It came like a quiet pressure against his chest, the old instinct that told him someone was watching from beyond the obvious line of sight. He looked across the field. Ghost was sitting now, still, silent, watching him. Elijah had seen working dogs in deserts, aboard transport planes, beside hospital beds, and beneath floodlights at midnight. He knew the alert posture of a K-9 who had caught a scent. He knew the tension of a dog waiting for a command. This was neither. Ghost looked at him with recognition. Not affection. Not suspicion. Recognition. The general's right hand tightened around the edge of the podium. Beneath his dark blue dress coat, tucked inside the inner pocket over his heart, rested an old military watch that had not worked in 8 years. Elijah carried it only on important days. He had never explained why. The second hand was frozen at 12 minutes past 4, the exact time recorded on the final mission report of Staff Sergeant Caleb Warren. A gust moved across the field, carrying the scent of pine, damp grass, and distant seawater. Ghost's nose lifted once. Mason crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" Ghost did not glance at him. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The base commander continued speaking, though his voice had become background noise to Elijah. Applause rose at the end of a sentence and faded uncertainly when the dog remained motionless. At 4 minutes, Rachel stepped closer. She checked Ghost's posture, his eyes, the line of his back. Nothing suggested fear. Nothing suggested illness. At 6 minutes, Mason tried a hand signal. Ghost ignored it. At 8, a colonel near the front whispered that the dog should be removed before he disrupted the ceremony. Elijah raised 2 fingers without taking his eyes from Ghost. The colonel fell silent. 9 minutes. The field seemed to narrow until there was nothing left but the Marine general on the platform and the white German shepherd sitting 80 feet away. Elijah felt the old watch against his chest, heavier than steel had any right to feel. A memory stirred behind his eyes. A dusty training yard. Caleb kneeling beside a much younger white dog. A private signal no manual had ever recorded. Elijah pushed the memory down. That dog was gone. Caleb was gone. Some doors, he had learned, remained closed because opening them served no one. Then the 10th minute arrived. Ghost's head lowered slightly. His ears softened. With slow, deliberate care, he lifted his right paw from the grass and held it against his chest. Elijah stopped breathing. The bandmaster lowered his baton. Mason stared at the dog as though he had spoken in a human voice. Rachel looked toward Elijah and saw the color leave his face. Ghost kept his paw raised, not shaking, not begging, waiting. Deep inside Elijah's coat, the broken watch gave a single electronic beep. It was small enough that no one else should have heard it. But Ghost did. His eyes shifted from Elijah's face to the pocket over his heart. Then the watch beeped again. The second beep was softer than the first, but it moved through Elijah like a bell heard underwater. He stepped away from the podium before anyone could stop him. The base commander lowered the citation. The band remained silent. Across the field, Ghost still held his paw against his chest, eyes fixed on the pocket beneath Elijah's medals. "Clear the area around the dog," Elijah said. His voice was calm, but every Marine close enough to hear it recognized the edge beneath the calm. Mason loosened his grip on the leash and motioned the nearest personnel back. Rachel remained beside Ghost, watching the slow rise and fall of his ribs. Elijah crossed the 80 feet between them without hurry. He had learned long ago that fear often revealed itself through speed. Today, he would reveal nothing. Yet with every step, the weight of the watch seemed to pull harder against his coat. Ghost tracked his approach but did not lower his paw. When Elijah stopped 6 feet away, the dog's nose moved once, drawing in his scent. Then Ghost looked toward the pocket again. "How long has he known that signal?" Elijah asked. Mason glanced at Rachel. "Sir, we do not know that it is a signal." Elijah kept his eyes on Ghost. "It is." A murmur passed through the officers behind him, quiet enough to remain respectful, loud enough to carry doubt. Elijah removed one glove and reached inside his coat. His fingers closed around the old watch. The metal was warm. It should not have been. He pulled it into the morning light. The face was scratched, the leather band darkened by years of handling, and the second hand remained frozen where it had stopped 8 years earlier. Ghost's ears tilted forward. His raised paw trembled for the first time. Rachel saw it. "General," she said softly, "do not move any closer yet." Elijah turned the watch over. The back bore 2 initials worn nearly smooth. Caleb Warren. The sight of them opened a door Elijah had kept sealed through 3 commands, 2 promotions, and countless nights when sleep came only in fragments. He remembered Caleb kneeling in a training yard beneath a white sky, laughing as a young German shepherd refused an ordinary command and invented one of his own. Caleb had touched 2 fingers to his chest. The dog had raised his right paw. A private signal. A quiet promise. "Follow me. Someone is still waiting." Elijah closed his hand around the watch. "That movement was never part of standard training," he said. Mason's expression changed. "Then how does Ghost know it?" Elijah did not answer. He looked at the dog's face more carefully. The pale fur around the muzzle. The faint gray near the eyes. A narrow scar beneath the left ear, almost hidden by the thick coat. Time had altered the animal, but not enough. A memory returned with painful clarity. A younger dog racing through red dust. Caleb calling him back with a whistle. White fur disappearing behind a line of vehicles. Elijah felt the field tilt beneath him, though his posture never changed. What name did he have when he arrived here? None, Rachel said. The shelter paperwork listed him as unidentified. We called him Ghost because he would appear at the edge of the kennel without making a sound. Where was he found? Near a decommissioned military storage site outside Jacksonville. About 20 miles from here. Elijah looked toward the distant tree line as if the answer might be waiting there. The watch beeped a 3rd time. Ghost lowered his paw and stood. Every muscle in his body became still. Then he took 1 step toward Elijah. Mason tightened the leash by instinct. Ghost stopped, not resisting, simply waiting. Elijah raised his hand. "Let him come." "Sir, we have not completed his behavioral assessment." "Let him come." Mason released the tension. Ghost crossed the remaining distance slowly. He did not sniff Elijah's boots or circle him as an unfamiliar dog might. He went directly to the watch. His nose touched the scratched metal once. Then he sat at Elijah's feet and raised his right paw again. Rachel drew a quiet breath. Mason stared at the dog. Around them, more than 200 Marines stood in absolute silence. Elijah lowered himself to 1 knee. His uniform tightened across his shoulders, and the metals on his chest gave a faint metallic sound. He held the watch between them. "You should not know this," he whispered. Ghost's amber eyes did not leave his. The dog placed his raised paw gently against Elijah's wrist. In that instant, the frozen second hand moved. 1 mark. Then another. The watch had not merely begun working. It was counting backward. The second hand moved backward 1 mark at a time, steady and impossible, while Ghost kept his paw against Elijah's wrist as if holding him in place. No one on the field spoke. The breeze lifted the edge of the general's coat, carrying the faint scent of salt, cut grass, and polished brass across the ceremony grounds. Elijah stared at the watch face. 11 minutes past 4. 10 minutes past 4. 9. The numbers were not changing, but the motion pulled him toward a morning he had spent 8 years trying not to remember. Take us inside, he said. Mason moved first, clearing a path toward the administration building. Rachel stayed beside Ghost. Elijah arose slowly, the old watch still ticking backward in his hand. The ceremony remained suspended behind them. 200 Marines standing in silence beneath the flags, uncertain whether they had witnessed a malfunction, a medical concern, or something no regulation had ever prepared them to name. Inside the building, the air smelled of floor wax and old paper. Rachel led them into a small briefing room with no windows, only a long oak table, 6 chairs, and a framed photograph of Marines raising a flag over a storm-damaged town. Mason closed the door. Ghost entered without hesitation and sat beside Elijah's chair. The watch stopped at 4 minutes past 4. Then the second hand began moving forward again. Rachel placed a portable scanner on the table. General, may I examine it? Elijah did not let go. Tell me what you think it is first. She studied the scratched case, the worn leather band, and the tiny opening near the crown. Not just a watch. Mason leaned closer. A tracker. Possibly an old short-range beacon. Some field units modified equipment when standard devices were too easy to identify. Elijah's jaw tightened. Caleb did. The room grew quieter. He set the watch on the table at last, though his fingertips lingered on the metal. Ghost lowered his head and rested his muzzle near it. Elijah watched the dog, then looked toward the wall as the past returned in fragments. 8 years earlier, Staff Sergeant Caleb Warren had been 31 years old, too patient for a man who worked under pressure and too quick to smile when everyone else had forgotten how. He had trained a white German shepherd named Ghost from the time the dog was barely large enough to fill a transport crate. Caleb never treated him like equipment. He spoke to him during long drives, shared pieces of apple beneath canvas shelters, and trusted him with the kind of silence men usually reserved for prayer. Their final assignment had begun before sunrise in a remote valley, where dust hung in the air like smoke and every sound seemed farther away than it was. Elijah had been a colonel then, leading a small advisory team through terrain that made radio signals unreliable. Caleb had carried the modified watch as a backup beacon. If the team became separated, the device was supposed to pulse every 10 minutes. But something went wrong with the signal. A sandstorm rolled through faster than expected. Visibility fell to a few yards. The unit lost contact with Caleb and Ghost near an abandoned communications station. Elijah waited as long as orders allowed. Then he made the decision that had followed him home. He withdrew the remaining team before nightfall. Search crews returned for days. They found an empty station, a damaged case, and one section of Ghost's white collar caught beneath a fallen door. No bodies. No clear trail. Only silence. Caleb and the dog were listed as missing, then presumed dead. Elijah had signed the final report himself. Rachel's scanner gave a soft tone. She turned the watch over and focused on a seam beneath the back plate. There is a power source inside, she said. Very weak, but active. After 8 years? Mason asked. It should not be possible. Elijah looked down at Ghost. Neither should he. The dog's ears shifted at Caleb's name. Rachel noticed. She reached for a tablet and opened the intake records. Ghost was found 12 months ago near the old Ravenswood storage compound. No tag, no chip, severe exhaustion, but no major injuries. He refused spoken commands. He responded only to hand gestures and tones. Which tones? Elijah asked. Rachel tapped the file. 3 short whistles. 1 long. Then silence. Elijah closed his eyes. Caleb's recall pattern. He had heard it hundreds of times. Mason looked between them. Sir, are you saying this is the same dog? Elijah studied the pale muzzle and the scar beneath the left ear. I am saying I buried the answer before I had proof. Ghost lifted his head. The watch gave another beep. Rachel's scanner filled with a thin green line, then a repeating pulse. Every 10 minutes. Mason stepped closer to the screen. It is receiving something. From where? Rachel adjusted the range. The pulse strengthened, then displayed a directional bearing. East by southeast. Elijah knew what lay there before she said it. The Ravenswood compound. Ghost stood. He walked to the closed door, looked back at Elijah, and raised his right paw. This time, no one called it a trick. Ghost held his paw in the air for 3 quiet seconds, then lowered it and waited beside the door. Elijah looked at Rachel. How reliable is that bearing? Reliable enough to tell us the signal is not coming from inside this building, she said. Beyond that, I need a stronger receiver. Mason checked the time on the wall clock. The ceremony outside had been paused for less than 15 minutes, yet the morning already felt separated from everything that had come before. The Ravenswood compound was shut down 6 years ago, he said. Most of the structures were cleared. What could still be transmitting from there? Elijah picked up the watch. Its ticking had stopped again, but the warmth remained in the metal. Something Caleb expected someone to find. Ghost turned his head at the sound of the name. Not sharply, not like a dog responding to a command. He looked toward Elijah with the quiet attention of someone hearing a familiar voice through a closed room. Rachel saw it and crouched a few feet away. Ghost, she said gently. The dog gave no response. She tried again, using the hand signal for attention. His eyes stayed on Elijah. Mason folded his arms. He has ignored every spoken command since the day he arrived. Sit, stay, heel down. Nothing. Elijah studied Ghost, then raised 2 fingers to his chest. It was the same private gesture Caleb had used in the training yard years ago. Ghost immediately sat straighter. Elijah moved his hand toward the floor. The dog lowered his body without hesitation. Mason's expression changed from doubt to disbelief. Rachel tried the gesture herself. Ghost followed it perfectly. He was never untrained, she whispered. He was trained to stop trusting voices. The meaning settled heavily over the room. A dog did not abandon spoken commands without reason. Somewhere during the missing years, Ghost had learned that voices could be imitated, orders could be false, and silence was safer than obedience. Elijah remembered Caleb saying that the best working dogs did not simply follow. They judged. They remembered. They chose. Show me everything from his intake, Elijah said. Rachel opened the digital file and turned the tablet toward him. The first image showed Ghost standing behind a chain-link gate at the county shelter. His white coat was gray with dust. His body was lean, his head lowered, but his eyes remained alert. In the next image, he was beside a concrete drainage ditch outside the old compound. A maintenance crew had found him there at dawn, sitting beside a rusted service marker. He had no identification and refused food until one of the workers placed a military field blanket near him. What was on that marker? Elijah asked. Rachel enlarged the photograph. Most of the lettering had faded, but one number remained visible. Building 27. Elijah knew it. Ravenswood had once stored communications equipment and retired field gear before materials were reassigned or destroyed. Building 27 had been used for items connected to classified operations. Was the building searched? The county report says it was. Empty and structurally unsafe, Rachel replied. The crew never entered. Mason leaned over the tablet. Why would Ghost stay beside it? Elijah looked at the watch in his palm. Because he was waiting for the pulse. Rachel connected the scanner again. A thin green line appeared, weak at first, then rose as the watch emitted another beep. 10 seconds later, a second pulse answered. The room seemed to contract around the sound. That is not an echo, she said. Something is responding. Ghost stood and went to the door. Elijah slipped the watch back into his coat. Get me an unmarked vehicle, a portable receiver, and access records for Ravenswood. Mason hesitated. Sir, should we notify base security? Not yet. General, if someone has maintained a transmitter on restricted property, this may be more than an old piece of equipment. Elijah looked at him. That is exactly why we do not announce where we are going. The door opened before Mason could answer. Colonel Nathan Mercer stepped inside, still wearing his formal uniform from the ceremony. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his expression carried the controlled concern of a man accustomed to entering rooms where decisions had already begun without him. General Brooks, the guests are waiting, he said. The commanding officer would like to know whether the ceremony will continue. Ghost moved before anyone spoke. He stepped between Mercer and Elijah, body still, mouth closed, eyes fixed on the colonel's hands. Mercer stopped. Is there a problem with the dog? Rachel watched Ghost's ears angle forward. He has not decided yet. Mercer gave a small smile that did not reach his eyes. Then perhaps he should be returned to the kennel. The watch beeped inside Elijah's coat. Ghost did not look toward the sound this time. He kept watching Mercer. For the first time that morning, a low breath moved through his chest. Not a growl. A warning held beneath one. Mercer's gaze dropped briefly to the pocket over Elijah's heart. It lasted less than a second. Elijah noticed. So did Rachel. The ceremony is postponed, Elijah said. For how long? Mercer asked. Elijah rested one hand on Ghost's shoulder. Until I remember what I was supposed to find. Mercer's face remained calm, but the color beneath it changed. Ghost lifted his right paw and placed it against Elijah's polished shoe. Then he turned toward the eastern wall, where the signal continued calling from 20 miles away. The eastern wall held no answers, only a faded map of the Carolina coast and the steady pulse of the receiver on Rachel's tablet. Elijah gave Mercer one last look, then turned to Mason. Use the south motor pool. No marked convoy. Mason nodded and left without another word. Mercer remained near the door. General, you are postponing a public ceremony over a dog's reaction and an obsolete watch. Elijah slipped the watch deeper into his coat. I am postponing it because an obsolete watch just answered a signal from restricted property. Mercer's eyes moved toward Rachel's tablet. Then security should handle it. They will, when I know who needs to be secured. The room went still. Ghost stood between them, white fur bright beneath the fluorescent lights, his body relaxed but deliberate. Mercer gave a slow breath and stepped aside. You are making this personal. Elijah opened the door. It became personal 8 years ago. 20 minutes later, an unmarked dark blue sport utility vehicle rolled away from Camp Lejeune under a sky beginning to cloud over. Mason drove. Rachel sat in the passenger seat with the receiver balanced across her knees. Elijah and Ghost occupied the second row. No one spoke as the base gates disappeared behind them. The road east cut through long stretches of pine and low marshland, where brown grass bent under the wind and shallow water reflected the color of steel. Ghost sat upright beside Elijah, watching the landscape through the window. Every few miles, his nose lifted, testing the air flowing through a narrow opening in the glass. Elijah kept one hand near the watch, but did not touch it. At the next 10-minute mark, it beeped. Rachel's receiver answered with a rising tone. The bearing is stronger, she said. Ravenswood is definitely the source. Mason checked the rearview mirror. We have company. A black sedan had appeared 300 yards behind them. It kept the same distance through 2 turns. Elijah did not look back. How long? Since the service road outside the base. Rachel glanced toward the side mirror. Could be coincidence. Coincidence does not match speed through every curve, Mason said. Ghost turned his head toward the rear window. His ears rose. He did not bark. He watched. Elijah remembered what Rachel had said in the briefing room. Ghost had been trained to distrust voices. Perhaps he had also learned to wait until danger declared itself. Mason took an unexpected turn toward a public boat ramp. The sedan continued past, disappearing behind a line of trees. They waited near the empty launch while wind pushed small waves against the wooden dock. 5 minutes later, Mason returned to the highway by another route. The black sedan reappeared 2 miles later. Not coincidence, Rachel said. Elijah removed his cell phone and powered it off. No calls from this point. Mason did the same. Rachel followed. The vehicle continued through the rural edge of Onslow County, where houses grew farther apart and the pines crowded closer to the road. Ghost shifted beside Elijah when the watch beeped again. This time, he placed one paw on the floor and leaned forward. He knows we are getting close, Rachel said. Elijah studied the dog's profile. Or he remembers the road. Ravenswood appeared beyond a rusted fence at the end of a cracked access lane. The compound had once covered nearly 40 acres. Now weeds rose through the pavement, and the remaining buildings sat beneath vines and weathered metal roofs. A faded government sign warned against unauthorized entry. Mason stopped at the chained gate. The access records you requested came through before we left, he said. Officially, no one has entered this property in 4 years. Rachel looked at the receiver. The signal was stronger than ever. Then officially, someone forgot to tell the transmitter. Elijah stepped out. The air smelled of wet pine, old concrete, and rain gathering somewhere beyond the trees. Ghost followed, landing lightly on the pavement. He did not wait for a leash. He walked to the gate and pressed his nose near the ground, then moved along the fence until he found a narrow opening where the lower wire had been bent back. That did not happen naturally, Mason said. Elijah looked at the tire marks in the soft dirt beside the fence. They were recent. Ghost slipped through the opening. Mason widened it enough for the others, and they entered one at a time. Behind them, far down the access road, the black sedan turned through the trees and stopped before reaching the gate. No doors opened. No one stepped out. The engine remained running. Ghost moved deeper into the compound, following a path only he seemed able to see. He passed 2 empty warehouses, a collapsed storage shed, and a row of concrete barriers darkened by moss. The receiver pulsed faster as they approached a low brick building with the number 27 barely visible above the entrance. The front doors were chained, but Ghost ignored them. He circled to the rear, where a narrow service door stood hidden behind ivy. On the ground beside it were 10 pale scratches carved into the concrete. Ghost placed his right paw over the final mark. The watch beeped. From inside the abandoned building, something answered. The answer from inside Building 27 was not a voice. It was a low electronic tone, faint and patient, followed by a pause exactly 10 seconds long. Then it sounded again. Ghost kept his paw over the final scratch in the concrete and looked at Elijah. Rain began to tap softly against the metal roof, first in scattered drops, then in a steady pattern that filled the silence around them. Mason tested the service door. It did not move. Locked from the inside, he said. Rachel raised the receiver. The green line climbed almost to the top of the display. The transmitter is less than 30 feet away. Elijah examined the doorframe. The paint had peeled down to bare wood, but the lock was new. Not recently installed, perhaps, yet far newer than anything else on the building. Someone wanted this place to look abandoned, he said. Mason glanced toward the access road. Through the trees, the black sedan remained motionless beyond the fence. And someone wants to know whether we believe it. Ghost lowered his paw and moved. Along the rear wall, he stopped beneath a narrow window covered by a sheet of weathered plywood. His nose traced the lower edge. Then he stepped back and looked at Mason. That is clearer than most spoken instructions, Mason murmured. He removed a compact tool from the vehicle kit and worked the rusted fasteners loose. The plywood came away with a dry groan, releasing a breath of cool air that smelled of dust, old canvas, and damp concrete. Behind it, the window glass had already been removed. Elijah looked at the clean edges. This is an entrance. Mason went through first, then Rachel. Elijah followed, and Ghost entered last with a silent leap. Inside, their flashlights cut narrow paths through the darkness. Rows of empty shelving stood beneath hanging wires. Watermarks ran down the brick walls. No footprints showed clearly on the dusty floor, yet a thin trail near the center had been disturbed more recently than the rest. Ghost found it immediately. He moved without hesitation, passing 2 storage rooms and a corridor where faded labels still clung to metal doors. The receiver pulsed faster. At the end of the hall, Ghost stopped before a small room marked Communications Archive. The handle turned freely. Elijah opened the door. The room beyond was no larger than a walk-in closet. A folding chair sat against one wall. On the floor rested a military field case, dark green, its corners worn smooth. A wire ran from the case to a compact antenna positioned beneath a vent. Rachel stared at the receiver. That is our source. The case had no dust on its latches. Mason crouched but did not touch it. Someone has maintained this. Elijah looked around the room. On the wall above the chair were 9 shallow marks and 1 deeper line, each spaced evenly. 10 marks. 10 minutes. Ghost walked to the field case and sat. His breathing changed, becoming slower, almost solemn. Elijah knelt beside him. You waited here, he said. Ghost looked toward the wall. Rachel examined the antenna connection. The transmitter is old, but the power cell is not. It was replaced within the last year. Around the time Ghost was found, Mason said. Elijah rested his hand on the field case. The metal was cold. He remembered Caleb working late in a temporary communications shelter, building simple systems from spare parts because he trusted nothing that could not survive dust, heat, and bad decisions. Caleb had once told him that machines were honest. They only failed when people failed them first. The watch beeped inside Elijah's coat. The field case answered. A small red light appeared near the latch. Then a mechanical click sounded from within. The lid released. Mason opened it carefully. Inside lay a portable recorder, a folded map, a sealed envelope, and a photograph protected beneath clear plastic. Rachel lifted the photograph first. It showed Caleb kneeling beside a young Ghost under the shade of a transport plane. Both were looking toward the camera. Caleb wore the same watch now resting against Elijah's heart. Ghost let out a quiet breath and touched the picture with his nose. Elijah looked away for a moment. toward the rain moving behind the narrow vent, because grief was easier to carry when no one watched it arrive. Mason unfolded the map. A red circle had been drawn around a small coastal chapel 6 miles east of Ravenswood. Beneath it, Caleb had written a single sentence in block letters. 10 minutes means he found the right man. Rachel picked up the recorder. Its battery indicator glowed. This should not still have power. Elijah stared at the envelope. His name was written across the front. Major General Elijah Brooks. Not Colonel. Not the rank he had held 8 years ago. His current rank. Someone had placed it here after his promotion. Outside, the black sedan's engine shut off. The sudden absence of sound carried through the rain. Ghost rose and positioned himself between Elijah and the doorway. Mason turned off his flashlight. Footsteps approached the building, slow and measured, stopping just beyond the rear wall. Rachel held the recorder close to her chest. Elijah opened the envelope. Inside was a single card. The message contained only 7 words. Do not trust the man who followed you. Then the door at the end of the corridor opened. The door at the end of the corridor opened slowly, and a man stepped into the dim light with both hands visible. He was tall, lean, and close to 40, with rain darkening the shoulders of his canvas jacket. His face carried the same narrow eyes and quiet expression Elijah remembered from Caleb, though time had sharpened them with grief. Ghost did not bark. He moved 1 step forward, then stopped. The stranger looked at him, and something in his guarded face broke open. "Hello, old friend," he said. Ghost's ears lowered. A soft sound left his throat. Not warning, not fear, but recognition held too long. The man knelt. Ghost crossed the corridor and pressed his white head against the stranger's chest. For several seconds, no one moved. Rain whispered against the roof while the dog breathed in the scent of a family he had not forgotten. Elijah lowered the card in his hand. "Who are you?" The man kept one hand against Ghost's neck. "Daniel Warren. Caleb was my older brother." Mason glanced toward the rear entrance. "You followed us from the base. I had to know whether the watch still worked." Daniel looked at Elijah. "And whether Ghost would choose you." Rachel held up the recorder. "You placed these items here?" "Most of them. Not the photograph. Not the map. Those came from Caleb." Elijah's voice remained controlled. "Caleb disappeared 8 years ago." Daniel stood slowly. "He did not disappear that day, General. He survived long enough to send Ghost home with the truth." The words settled into the room like dust after a door closed. Elijah stared at him. Search teams found no sign of either one, because they searched where the final report told them to search. Daniel reached inside his jacket and removed a weatherproof notebook. He placed it on the field case. "My brother made it to an abandoned relay station 12 miles from the last confirmed location. He had the dog, the watch, and records that were never supposed to leave the valley." Mason opened the notebook. Caleb's name appeared on the first page beneath dates, supply numbers, and handwritten notes. Daniel continued. He discovered that relief shipments meant for local clinics were being redirected through private contractors. Medicine, water systems, emergency generators. Nothing dangerous. Just essential supplies quietly vanishing while reports claimed they had arrived. Rachel's expression tightened. Who controlled the reports? Daniel looked toward Elijah's coat, where the watch rested. Colonel Nathan Mercer. The name seemed to drain warmth from the room. Elijah remembered Mercer entering the briefing room, his eyes dropping toward the pocket over Elijah's heart. Why did Caleb not contact command directly? He tried. The channels passed through Mercer's office. Every message was delayed, altered, or marked unreliable. Caleb realized spoken codes were no longer safe, so he trained Ghost to follow gestures and carry the beacon. He sent him toward the extraction route with copies of the records. Daniel looked down at the dog. Ghost made it close. Someone intercepted him before he reached the team. Mason turned another page. How do you know this? A civilian radio operator found Caleb 2 days later. My brother was weak, but conscious. He gave the operator my name and asked him to protect the notebook. By the time the message reached me, the official investigation was closed. Elijah's eyes remained on Daniel. And Caleb? Daniel's voice softened. He never made it home, but he did not leave without finishing what he could. Ghost returned to Elijah and sat between the two men, as though joining the last pieces of an old formation. Rachel examined the recorder. What is on this? Caleb's final statement. The operator recorded it. Daniel nodded toward the envelope. I updated the rank on your name after your promotion. I needed you to understand that someone had watched your career and waited for the day you had enough authority to reopen the case. Why wait until now? Elijah asked. Because Mercer retires next month. After that, the remaining storage records can be legally destroyed. And because Ghost was found last year at Ravenswood, sitting beside this building as if he had spent 7 years trying to return to the signal. Elijah looked at the 10 marks on the wall. You activated the transmitter. Every 10 minutes for 12 months. Daniel's eyes moved toward Ghost. I hoped he would lead the right person here. Mason glanced toward the corridor. The card says not to trust the man who followed us. Daniel shook his head. I did not write that card. Silence returned. Rachel looked at the envelope. The handwriting on the front was neat. Recent. Deliberate. Outside, another vehicle rolled onto the cracked pavement. Ghost stood. The receiver on Rachel's tablet changed frequency, and a second signal appeared beside the first. Elijah pressed the recorder's play button. Static filled the room. Then Caleb Warren's voice, tired but unmistakably calm, spoke from 8 years away. Elijah, if you are hearing this, Ghost remembered what all of us were ordered to forget. Caleb's voice came through the recorder beneath a veil of static, faint but steady, and for one suspended moment, even the rain seemed to quiet around it. Elijah, if you are hearing this, then Ghost found his way back to someone who still remembers what duty is supposed to mean. The recording paused, followed by the soft sound of Caleb drawing breath. Elijah stood motionless beside the field case. Ghost pressed close to his leg, eyes fixed on the recorder as if the voice had entered the room in living form. The supply records were changed before they reached command, Caleb continued. I kept copies. Mercer knew I had them. He also knew the normal channels could not be trusted once he controlled the reports. Mason glanced toward the corridor where the sound of the second vehicle had stopped. Daniel remained near the wall, listening with his head lowered. If you signed the withdrawal order, Caleb said, do not carry that weight alone. You made the decision with the information you were given. That information was false. Elijah closed his eyes. 8 years of guilt did not disappear in an instant. It shifted. It changed shape. The burden he had carried as failure now revealed another truth beneath it. He had not abandoned Caleb knowingly, but he had signed the final report without forcing the questions that still lived in its margins. He had accepted silence because silence was easier to file than doubt. Caleb's voice returned. Ghost knows the signal. 10 minutes means he found the person with the authority. To finish this, if that person is you, then you have a choice. Protect the institution from embarrassment, or protect what the institution is supposed to stand for. The recorder clicked off. No one spoke. The field case emitted one final pulse, then went dark. Elijah opened the notebook and turned through Caleb's careful entries. Dates, shipment numbers, contractor names, receipts signed by clinics that had never received the supplies. At the bottom of one page stood Mercer's authorization code. Not rumor. Not memory. Proof. Rachel looked toward the doorway. Someone is outside. Ghost had already heard it. He stepped in front of Elijah, but his posture remained calm. A shadow crossed the corridor. Then Colonel Nathan Mercer entered alone, rainwater shining along the shoulders of his uniform coat. He stopped when he saw Daniel, the open case, and the recorder in Rachel's hands. For the first time that day, his expression lost its polish. You should not have come here, Mercer said. Elijah looked at him. That is what you told yourself 8 years ago. Mercer's gaze moved to the notebook. You do not understand the situation. Then explain it. Mercer exhaled slowly. The contracts were compromised. The chain of custody was a mess. If the truth had surfaced then, several operations would have been suspended. People would have lost access to aid entirely. Daniel's voice was quiet. So you protected the system by stealing from the people it was meant to help. Mercer looked away. I contained a crisis. Elijah stepped closer. You contained evidence. Ghost remained beside him, silent and watchful. Mercer's eyes dropped to the dog. That animal was never supposed to come back. The words landed harder than any confession. Rachel tightened her grip on the recorder. Mason lifted his chin. Daniel said nothing, but his face changed. Elijah did not raise his voice. You had Ghost moved through false records. Mercer's silence answered. You erased Caleb's messages. Still no denial. And you let me sign a report built on information you knew was wrong. Mercer looked at him then. You signed it because you wanted the matter closed as much as everyone else did. The Truth in that accusation cut more deeply because Elijah could not dismiss it. He had wanted closure. He had wanted the names accounted for, the files completed, the dead honored in a form the living could survive. He had mistaken completion for truth. Ghost moved to the field case and placed his paw over Caleb's notebook. Elijah looked down at him. There was no accusation in the dog's eyes. Only waiting. The same waiting that had lasted through shelters, empty compounds, and 12 months of 10-minute signals. Elijah removed the insignia pin from his coat and set it on the table. "You are right about one thing," he said. "I signed the report." Mercer's shoulders loosened slightly, as if he thought the admission had saved him. Elijah continued. "So my name will be on the correction." He turned to Mason. "Contact the Inspector General. Secure the original files. Notify Base Legal and request an immediate hold on all Ravenswood records." Mason reached for his phone. Mercer stepped forward. Ghost rose between them and lifted his right paw. Not in warning. In command. "Stop." Mercer did. Elijah met his eyes. "This will damage careers." Mercer's voice had gone thin. "Maybe mine. Maybe yours." Elijah picked up Caleb's notebook. A uniform is not protected by hiding what was done beneath it. Outside, the rain began to ease. Pale light entered through the vent and touched Ghost's white coat. Elijah knelt beside him. "I left one Marine behind once because I trusted the wrong silence," he said. He placed his hand beneath the raised paw. "I will not do it again." Ghost lowered his paw into Elijah's palm, and the watch over his heart stopped counting. 3 weeks later, morning lights spread across Camp Lejeune with the soft gold of early November, touching the brick buildings, the wet grass, and the rows of white chairs arranged beneath a clear Carolina sky. The ceremony Elijah had postponed was never resumed in its original form. Too much had changed. Colonel Nathan Mercer had been removed from duty while investigators reviewed the Ravenswood records, the altered reports, and the supply contracts Caleb had preserved. Several civilian clinics received formal notice that their missing aid would be restored. Caleb Warren's final mission record was corrected. The word presumed was removed from the line that had reduced his last days to uncertainty, and in its place stood a simple statement of truth. He had remained on duty. He had protected evidence. He had sent his partner home. Elijah stood near the memorial platform without the full display of medals he had worn that October morning. His dark blue uniform was precise, but plain. He had chosen only the ribbons that belonged to service, not ceremony. Beside him sat Ghost, his white coat clean beneath the sunlight, his old collar replaced by a strong leather one that still carried the faded metal plate from his years with Caleb. Daniel Warren stood in the front row, holding his brother's dog tag between both hands. Rachel and Mason waited nearby. No brass band played. No promotion citation rested on the podium. Only a folded flag, Caleb's photograph, and the small military watch lay beneath the Marine Corps emblem. More than 200 Marines had returned. Some had attended the first ceremony. Others came because word had traveled quietly through the base that a forgotten Marine was finally being brought home in the only way still possible. Elijah stepped to the microphone. For several seconds, he said nothing. The wind moved through the flags behind him. Somewhere beyond the field, a training whistle sounded and faded. Ghost lifted his head, then settled again. 8 years ago, Elijah began. I signed a report that I believed was complete. His voice carried across the field without effort. It was not complete. It was convenient. No one shifted. Elijah looked toward Caleb's photograph. The difference between those two things cost a good Marine his truth. It cost his family years of answers. And it left a loyal dog carrying a mission no one had the courage to hear. Daniel lowered his eyes. Rachel placed one hand lightly against his shoulder. Elijah continued. Rank gives a person authority. It does not give him perfect sight. Sometimes the truth stands directly in front of us, silent, patient, waiting for us to stop defending what we already believe. He looked down at Ghost. The dog met his gaze with the same pale amber eyes that had held him still for 10 minutes. Ghost was called unresponsive, difficult, broken. He was none of those things. He remembered his orders better than we remembered our duty. The words moved through the crowd without applause. They did not need it. Elijah stepped away from the microphone and lifted the watch from the table. Investigators had opened the case and found Caleb's modifications inside, a simple beacon designed to recognize one answering frequency. The device no longer counted backward. Its hands rested at 12 minutes past 4, where they had stopped years earlier. Elijah placed it beside Caleb's photograph. Then Daniel approached with the dog tag. His steps were measured, though grief made the final few feet seem longer. He knelt beside Ghost and fastened the tag to the new collar. The metal rested against the white fur with a faint click. Ghost turned toward Daniel and pressed his nose against the man's hand. Daniel smiled through tears he did not hide. "He waited for you," Elijah said softly. Daniel shook his head. "He waited for all of us." The honor guard raised the folded flag. A bugler began the final call. The notes moved slowly over the field, clear and lonely, reaching beyond the buildings toward the pine woods and the distant coast. Elijah stood at attention. Daniel placed his hand over his heart. Ghost remained seated between them. When the last note faded, silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. Elijah lowered his salute and knelt beside the dog. From his pocket, he removed the insignia pin he had placed on the table at Ravenswood. He turned it once in his fingers, then attached it to a small shadow box that would be given to Caleb's family. The promotion was approved, Mason said quietly behind him. Elijah looked back. "I know. You are still turning it down?" Elijah glanced across the field at the Marines standing beneath the morning light. Some days a man needs another star. He rested his hand against Ghost's shoulder. Other days he needs to remember what the first one meant. Mason nodded. No further explanation was necessary. Daniel moved to stand beside Elijah. Together they looked at Caleb's photograph while Ghost watched both men, his breathing slow and even. Then the dog rose. He faced Elijah for only a second. No long stare. No waiting. He lifted his right paw. Elijah bent and placed his open hand beneath it. The paw settled into his palm. At that same moment, the chapel bell near the edge of the base began to ring. One clear note, then another, 10 in all. The sound traveled across the field, through the pines, and into the bright Carolina morning. 8 years earlier, 10 minutes had meant that someone was still waiting. Now the signal meant something gentler. The evidence had been heard. The name had been restored. The promise had reached its end. Ghost lowered his paw, but did not move away. Elijah kept his hand on the dog's shoulder as Daniel stood beside them. And for the first time, none of them were searching the distance for someone who might still return. Caleb was not walking through the gate. He was not answering from the trees. Yet in the corrected record, the dog tag against white fur, and the silence no longer built from lies, he had finally been given a place among the living again. The breeze lifted the edge of his photograph. Ghost looked toward it, ears forward, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. Then he turned toward the open field. Elijah walked beside him. Daniel joined them. And beneath the fading echo of the 10th bell, 2 men and 1 faithful dog went home together.